I'm excited to be here. Yes, my podcast, we can talk later, maybe during the question and answer. It's basically about parents staying out of the way for kids to actually play and have fun, because parents mess it up, right? I got 4 kids myself, and just seeing the youth landscape today, I just think there's so much that we can do as parents, as men, as fathers, to really help the kids. So we'll get into that a little bit, but I'm excited to be here. Excited y'all came out tonight. As I said, I'm passionate about the Lord. I'm passionate about beer. And I'm passionate about not having to put my kids to bed tonight. So this is the perfect night for me to come down here and get out of 4 kids in bath time. But, you know, one of the greatest days of my life is the day I gave my life to Christ. But I'll be honest, one of the all-time greatest days of my life also was the day I got called up to the big leagues. And I love to tell us it was July 7th, 2005, when I got called up. And actually, the night before, we were in Montgomery, Alabama, and I was in AA, and Brian Snitker was our manager. Of course, everybody knows Snit's the manager now of the Braves. And we got rained out, and so we were at a Japanese steakhouse. And, you know, the guy's doing the volcano. I think we did a couple sake bombs. And next thing you know, my phone starts ringing, and it says, you know, Snit. Well, I just put it to voicemail because we're having fun. So he calls me again, I put it to voicemail again. And so I finally look, and it was a text, and he said, I think you're going to want to call me. And so, of course, I called him. He had me come to the room, toasted me a beer, and was like, you're going to the big leagues tomorrow. So I drive home. A guy took me home. I got home at 1 in the morning. We had a day-night doubleheader at 1 o'clock and 7 versus the Cubs. And so I'm probably one of the only guys that actually slept in his childhood bed the night he made. My mom made me breakfast the morning of the big league. And I get to the field, I remember like 9:30, and Bobby calls me in his office. Congratulations. He's like, I'm playing you in one of the 2 games today, and you can pick which one. And I'm like, wow. And I was like, well, who's pitching? And he was like, well, the first game, it's Kerry Wood. The second game, it's Jerome Williams. And I was like, I'll play the second game and sit down and watch. But I mean, I was so fortunate. I was 0 for 3 with 2 strikeouts going into my last at bat. It was a 3-2 count. And so I always tell people I was literally 1 strike away from the hat trick. And my favorite player in the history of baseball, Glendon Rush, threw me a changeup. And I put him in the seats. And really, that was the start of my career. But the reason I tell you that day is a lot of people honestly don't know a year earlier to the exact day, July 7th of 2004, I was in Frederick, Maryland, playing. I was on the Myrtle Beach Pelicans, and I was literally getting called up the next day to AA. I was hitting .299 going into the 8th inning, my last at bat. And like an idiot, like I actually was like, I got to hit 300 before I leave Myrtle Beach. You know, no matter what, I was going to AA the next day. And I squared to bunt. And the guy let one go, and it hit me 97 right in the face. Completely knocked me out. I was unconscious for 20, 25 seconds. I still have a plate here, a plate there. I had 7.5 hours of surgery. And for about a week and a half, they didn't know if I was honestly ever going to play again. You know, I tell people all the time, it's hard to hit with 2 good eyes. I mean, I needed full eyesight to play. But where my story got interesting was my mom was such a faithful woman. And she came in the hospital every single hour, and she would keep reading me Joshua 1:9, which says, have I not commanded you? Be strong and courageous, do not be discouraged or afraid, for I am the Lord your God, and will be with you wherever you go. And to this day, I still have this little bracelet right here that I wear every once in a while, and it just reminds me. And at the time, I'm going to be honest with you, I didn't want to hear it. I was pissed at God. You know, I'm like, here, this whole dream that I had planned out, and you're going to take it away from me. And really, when you sit back, right, and you kept reading that verse, and my mom would keep reading that verse to me, and it was like, wait a minute, by His grace and by His love and by His mercy, am I getting to play this great game? And especially at the age I was. So I always laugh because I tell people on July 7, 2004, I was laying on the ground, bleeding all over the plate. And literally a year later, I was running out at Turner Field in front of 45,000. And it's just such a cool story for me, because if that's not a God thing, I don't know what is. Like exactly to the day that's when I get called up. And it's a little bit of what I'm going to talk about tonight is God's plan for you. Because at the end of the day, right, like here I was, my best friend Brian McCann got called up in June. And I'm like, well, that's bull crap. Why does he get to go up before I get to go up? You know? And I kept, when is it my turn? When is it my turn? You know? And in society today, guys, we get so caught up selfishly. What about me? What about me when the greatest servant, Jesus Christ, is sitting there telling you, just serve, just love. Just go out and make an impact. And God knows in today's society, we need male leadership, Christian male leadership more than ever, especially for our kids. When you're trying to raise kids like we are today, it's difficult, it's tough. And so, you know, for me, it's a great reminder that, you know, God gave me that opportunity to play. I was led to Christ as a sophomore in high school in Black Mountain, North Carolina. Ben Watson, everybody remembers Ben Watson, tight end. He was my huddle leader. And at the time, he was actually at Duke. A lot of people don't know that. He went to Duke before he went to Georgia. And I remember, man, being around him all the time. And I honestly went because our offensive coordinator invited me, and I wanted more balls thrown my way the next year. So I'm like, can't tell this guy no. So I ended up going, but the more I hung around this, the joy I saw, the things that might bother a lot of other people didn't bother him. He loved sports, he loved to compete, but more than anything, he loved the Lord. And it was such an appealing thing for me, and I'm like, I want that. And it's funny because I committed my life to Christ that night, but everybody always holds some back, right? And for me, it was the sports. And that was honestly my identity. I even when I became a Christian, like for me, it was like, I'm Jeff Francoeur, the baseball player. Like that's who I thought I was. And I think about it now, and it's like, how many of us in here, whether it's work or whatever it is, like we put all our identity into that. And it's like, for what? You know, at the end of the day, baseball, the game goes on. I've gotten released, I've gotten traded, I've gotten told to take a hike, and next thing you know, they're playing the next night. Like the game doesn't stop, life doesn't stop, your job's not. So stop putting your identity into something that's honestly going to leave you hopeless. And God knows I've played with enough baseball players. You want to talk about, and I'll get to it in a little bit, trying to witness in baseball? I mean, you're witness to guys that are making millions of dollars, living a lifestyle. What do they want with Christ? What do they need? They got everything they want. And they're the same guys 15 years, which is now, they're divorced, they don't get to see their kids, they're miserable. And it's like for that little part of time, so, you know, I talk about it all the time, we give our kids rules, right? God is not asking you to be this. That's why I said it, and I'm going to tell you in a little bit, like I did my best witnessing in a bar. I truly did through baseball, and I'll get to that in a little bit, but like, God's not telling you got to be this perfect guy, this perfect man. We're going to sin, we're going to make mistakes. But he puts guardrails for you, just like we do with our kids. And it's for our best interests. How many times you fight with your kids, right? Like, there's a reason I say no. And sometimes that's God saying no to maybe something that's not open. And for me, I always try to say, if you will let God take you, he will take you on the ride of your life. And there's no doubt, numerous times you're going to fight with them, you're going to ask why, you're going to ask how come. You know, I got called up in 2005 with the Braves, and my first 3 years were unbelievable. I thought I was going to be Chipper Jones, play in Atlanta for 16 years. And all of a sudden, 2009 hit, and I couldn't hit water if I fell out of a boat. I sucked. And I didn't know what to do. I couldn't hit. I'm like, this isn't working. I was telling the guys on the podcast earlier, like, I'd go to the barber shop, and dude, I was listening to that guy tell me how to hit. I'm like, so you think if I get my back elbow up, you know? I was so lost, I was just looking for any answer. And so we're in Colorado, and I had my best game of the year, actually. I was 3 for 4, 3 doubles, like 5 RBIs. My wife was on the trip. And the next day, I'm in the cages at 3 o'clock, and clubhouse guy comes down. He's like, hey, Bobby wants to see you in his office. I'm like, well, that's not good. And so I remember walking up there, but I'm just coming off my best game. And he's like, Bobby was cut straight to the chase. He's like, Jeff, you've been traded. And I was like, really? And I was like, where? And he goes, New York. And for a second, I'm not going to lie to you, I was like, the Yankees? And Bobby looked at me and he goes, no, the other side, Queens. And I'm like, so here I am a Brave. You're supposed to hate the Mets with everything in your heart. And dude, we got on a plane that night at 7 o'clock. We fly to Newark, New Jersey. And my wife, she thinks the world's ending. So she's on the plane crying. The flight attendant hates me because she thinks I'm making my wife cry, so she would not give me anything to drink, anything. We land at 1:30 in the morning, and the next day at 1 o'clock, there I am running out in right field at Citi Field. And you want to talk about weird, growing up going to all the Braves games, all this, and now I'm wearing a freaking Mets jersey? And then, worst case, they spelled my name wrong on the back. I actually think I got someone fired for that in the clubhouse. But I'm like, they can't even get my name right. But you know what? It was like, I kept asking, why? Why am I not in Atlanta? McCann was still here, doing great, making all-star teams. Why am I gone? And you know what? Like anything, if I would just be patient, the next year I get traded to the Texas Rangers and I play in the World Series in 2010. And to this day, the greatest accomplishment I've ever made was running out there in the starting lineups for Game 1 of the World Series and looking at my mom and dad and all my friends and the people that were there with me the whole way. And then I went to Kansas City for 3 years and made the best friends I have in the game. We have 3 couples. We vacation every year. They're like brothers to me. I wouldn't have made that if I was still here in Atlanta. And then, honestly, the biggest challenge in my life came, and if some of y'all know my background, in 2014, I had to sign a minor league contract, and I went and played for the El Paso Chihuahuas for 3 months. Now, people ask me how I know my wife loves me. First of all, we've known each other since 3rd grade. But second of all, she took a baby, and we moved to El Paso and lived in a 1-bedroom apartment, literally overlooking Juarez. And so I'm there, right? And I was miserable. I was so mad, and I'm like, why in the world am I here? Like, God, you've had plans, you've taken care of me, but not this one. And I'm telling you, for this first 2 weeks, I was awful. And we spent Easter Sunday in Las Vegas. If you've ever been to Vegas, go on Easter Sunday. It's pretty interesting scene out there. And we weren't staying at Aria or the Bellagio. We were staying at the Golden Nugget. Now, I will tell you this, the slot machines hit a lot better at the Golden Nugget than they do the other casinos. But we're sitting here at the Golden Nugget, and my daughter was 9 months old, my oldest. And her mom was there, so we went to dinner one night. And my wife's always been very supportive. But we're sitting there at dinner one night, and she just flat looked at me, and she was like, if you're going to suck, come home. Let's go home. And it blew, she's never done that. Obviously, she yells at me a lot, but she's never done that. And I looked, and I'm like, what? And she's like, you suck. She was like, you have no passion for what you're doing. You just walk through. And then she said something that hit me like a ton of bricks. She was like, and here you are supposed to be this Christian leader, and you got all these young kids looking up, and all you can think about is yourself. And let me tell you, that just, it really hit me hard, because there again, what we talk about? Servant leadership. Here I was after 9 years in the big leagues. All these kids were just looking for anything, me to tell them a story about playing with John Smoltz, playing with whoever. And I'm so worried about myself that I can't see that these guys are just looking for anything to try to help them get up to the next level. And so I had a manager, Pat Murphy, who actually just won Manager of the Year with the Brewers this year. And we went to work, and 3 months later, I got back up to the big leagues. And finished that year. And then 15, I signed to go to Philly. I played in Philly all year in 15. And then the coolest part of my career was it brought me back to Atlanta in 16. And I never left on the terms that I wanted to. And to be able to come back and have my 2 oldest kids watch me play, to see them out there at family day, to see them out there in the outfield watching me, was still the greatest thing for me in baseball. And then probably the funniest thing happened, because, as I told you, a lot of what I did was witness in a bar, honestly. So after every game, I was known as a guy that would go back to the hotel bar, and I would have 2 Jack and Gingers. I love Jack Daniels. People always laugh. They're like, you want the Blands? I'm like, nah, give me Jack. And I love it. And so that was my thing. I didn't go out after. But these guys knew that I would get in the weeds with them. And we could talk about anything. And I built relationships time after time with so many of these players that I played with. And it wasn't like we just sat there and talked about Jesus every night. There were many nights we never even brought Christ up. But it was just digging. And that's why when we talk about getting in small groups and getting this, like, we're meant to be with guys. We're meant to be together. We're meant to hold each other accountable. We're meant to love each other. I tell the story, my wife, God, 4 years, our youngest is 4. And we had him, and a week later, I found my wife bleeding out on the bathroom floor. And she had to have an emergency hysterectomy. And I mean, I was a mess, as you can imagine. I got 4 kids. And I'm thinking, what, your mind takes you all these places. What am I going to do? And it was so funny because at the hospital, I had buddies text me, buddies that I had been friends with since I was 5 years old. I had 5 guys that spent 4 hours outside the hospital praying for me. And it was my small group. Dropped everything they did, 8 o'clock on a Sunday night till 1 in the morning. Because they couldn't come in. That was during COVID. And so they just sat out there and prayed for 5 hours. And I always remember, this is why I need these guys. Because I know they're lifelong friends. They're guys that truly care about me, truly care about my family, truly care about my kids. And so for me, I go back to 2016. I came back to the Braves. And I got a call from the Florida Marlins. And Giancarlo Stanton got hurt, and they wanted me to waive my no-trade clause. If y'all remember in 16 with the Braves, we sucked. I mean, we were awful. That's what we got Freddie Gonzalez fired, let's be honest. And so I remember I said no automatically. I'm not leaving Atlanta. I live here. My kids can come to the game. And sure enough, again, my wife kept saying, this might be your last chance to make a playoff run. What do you think? So I went down there. I accepted the trade offer. I went down there, and we didn't play well when I got there. And so I'm like, okay, this can't be the reason, right? Like, we're not good. And I'm sure some of y'all remember, but the last week of the season was when Jose Fernandez died. And I was on that Marlins team. The Braves were actually in town playing the Marlins. And you want to talk about walking through a mess. Obviously, I'd only been there 2.5 months. But to literally say bye to a teammate at 11 o'clock at night, and the next morning he's in a boating accident dead, and especially for what he meant to Miami down there, I mean, it was incredible. But there were so many broken people. And I went and got a Max Lucado book, You'll Get Through This, and I wrote a handwritten note to each guy on the team in that book. And there were 34 guys on the team because that was when September call-ups were. And I'm telling you, every single guy at some point in the last, 9 years has sent me a text. At some point, whether it was just to say, hey, I saw that book sitting there, thank you. I don't know if they're Christians now or not. But it was like I was there in that moment for that reason, and that was it. That was the end of my career. Like, I thought I'd come back the next year, do something, and it was like, that was it, was playing there. Now, I will tell you one, not a funny story, but we had his funeral on Thursday. And we flew up to Washington to end the season, and Jeffrey Loria, the owner, made reservations for 35 guys at Joe's Stone Crab. Y'all been to Joe's Stone Crab? Oh, it's phenomenal. Just crush it. And I love to eat, so I love big league dinners. Like, that's what I love. And so we went up there, and do you know 35 guys? He gave me the credit card because he actually trusted me the most. $134,000 bill. $134,000. And when I gave the credit card the next day, dude, I was so worried. And he actually was like, it's not as bad as I thought it was going to be. Ichiro was ordering like $500 sake things. They had Ace of Spades champagne going, Opus One. Like, it was a party, I'll say that. But like, that's how I ended my career. And now that I look back, I'm like, God, is there any better way to end your career than that? Being able to witness to these guys. And for a lot of them, the worst thing that's ever happened to them, and just being able to there to say, hey, I'm here to pray with you, man. I'm here to pray for you. And ultimately, this is what matters. Not how many strikeouts he threw, not whatever, but is he going to heaven? And ultimately, when you see this group of guys in here and all that, like that's my wish. Because I know the peace that it's brought to my life. God knows baseball is a roller coaster of a game. I mean, how many times, I'm actually still only one of 4 Braves that's ever struck out 5 times in a game in 5 at-bats. in Miami. And I got thrown out in the 11th inning that day too. Bobby actually came out and I actually said, I just did you a favor by getting thrown out. Put someone else in my place. And then after the game, they go, well, you know, you're only the 4th Atlanta Brave to ever strike out 5 times in a game in 5 at-bats. And I go, well, who are the other 3? And they were like Fred McGriff, Andrew Jones, and Dave Justice. And I was like, well, then I'm in hell of company, man. Like, not that mad about it. So when I go back, finishing up here the last 5 minutes, and then we'll do some questions. In 2007, me and my wife go to Perimeter Church, and I got in this small group with Randy Pope, who was a pastor there for, 38, 40 years. And to this day, there's not been a time where I've not been in a small group. And not just because I need people to feed into me, but just to walk and to do life with these other guys. I mean, how many guys are struggling at work, at home, in their marriages, and things, and you have no outlet? Like, we're meant to be in community. We're meant to talk. We're meant to cry together sometimes, even. It's okay. That's strength. And so I urge everybody in here at some point to try to get that. And I don't know if y'all ever do this. I always think sometimes, like, and my mind takes me weird places, but like, what does God think of me? Or like, does God approve of what I'm doing? Or did that make him happy? And I think back, so my dad was a real ball buster, man. He was a disciplinarian, like down to the T, but he was at every one of my games, all this. So the year after I retired, we were actually down at the beach and we were in the ocean. And I just kind of said, Dad, you saw me play thousands of games. What's your favorite moment of watching me all these years? And I was expecting, you know, a walk-off this or a World Series this. And he said, you know my proudest moment, son? And my dad does not go deep much. He's old school from Boston, man. Like, you try to get a hug and you kind of get the fist pump, you know? Now, I know he loves me like crazy and he'd do anything, but that's how my dad is. And my dad said, I actually came up to a game in Cincinnati to surprise you. I drove up there and you didn't know I was there. And you struck out 3 times. Again, another bad game. See, I had plenty of them, okay? And he goes, and after the game, I watched all these guys on your team, y'all lost, just walk by all these kids on the bus, and you stopped and signed every autograph for 15 minutes. And he's like, that's how I knew I raised a great son. Now, I'm not saying I'm perfect, and I guarantee there's many games I blew right by kids. But if I sat there and I thought, man, how cool is that that's what my dad thinks? And God's love is infinity greater for us. So, you know, whether you hold a door for someone, whether you tell someone, hey, I'm praying for you, man, even if you don't know what they're going through, you know how happy that makes God that men are together and in community? It's the greatest, most powerful thing there is. And so I leave you with this. We had Sunday night baseball in Atlanta, and we flew to DC. And we had about 20 minutes left on the flight, and all of a sudden, the engine goes out. Literally, you heard it go out, and guys were freaking out. Myself included, a little bit, to be honest with you. And they come on the thing, we're going to emergency land before we even get to DCA and Reagan. And they were like, there's going to be fire trucks. And it was the bumpiest ride I've ever had down. I mean, we're kind of tilted. And you had guys trying to get on their phone, call their wives. I'm like, dude, it ain't working. You're 30,000 feet in the air. But the more I think about that, right, like when you're on a plane 30,000 feet up, it doesn't matter how much money you make, what you've done. You're no different than the guy sitting next to you. You're at the mercy of the pilot and the mercy of God. And so I always just say this. If you're on that plane, it's going down, do you know where you're going? I'm not trying to scare you. I'm not trying to sit here and tell you that, like, you need to accept Christ tonight because you're dying tomorrow. I'm just saying, when I look at a bunch of guys and when I'm in my small group and we talk, like, that's what Satan does not want. He wants everybody divided. He wants all this stuff. God knows we've watched on this last election. I'm so sick of it. Like, Jesus is the true king, no matter what. And so I just ask that you think about that. If you're on a plane that's going down, do you know where you're going? Because as scared as I was, at the end of the day, I thought, I might meet Jesus soon. Now, I'm going to miss my earthly life. I'm going to miss my kids. I had 2 at the time. But you know what? I know exactly where I'm going. And I'll tell you this. I told you it's tough in baseball to pour into guys. In chapel, we used 25 guys on a team, and we would have usually 4 or 5 guys in chapel. So we left D.C. and went to Colorado. We had 23 guys in chapel on that Sunday. So you want to talk about God doing a powerful thing? Even one guy on the team brought his 2 bats in with him. And he had a home run that day, and I kept trying, and it never worked for me. But I share that story to just tell you, like, man, I'm so excited to be here with y'all tonight. And I love to drink beer. I love to drink whiskey. All right? And I love to watch sports. God knows it. It's still a lot of my identity. But I will tell you, if there's one thing to know, like, having Christ in my life through all the crap I've been through, I don't know how I would have got through without it. And being plugged into a community with other guys that are like y'all, like you, and thinking the same way, there's nothing more powerful, and there's nothing more that pisses Satan off. So I think we're going to open it up for questions now, right?
Yep, stand up and have a question.
Yeah, man.
Yeah, you pick, actually. You pick these.
Oh, I get a pick, thanks.
Do you have any good golf stories?
Well, I got a lot of great golf stories. You want me to share my Tiger Woods one?
Yeah, let's hear it.
So I got a chance to play with Tiger Woods 6 times. But the coolest time, and I told this on Jason Stark's podcast about 3 months ago, and actually told it on the Happy Hour podcast, which I love. I said, who doesn't like Happy Hour, man? Like, I'm all in. But so I was 22 years old, and Bobby basically told me, he was like, we had spring training, and Tiger called Smoltzy and said, see if Jeff and Adam LaRoche, because I'd played with them one time before, want to come play with us. We're playing 27 holes. Of course, I wanted to go, but we had a game the next day at 1 versus the Yankees in Orlando. I'm 22 years old. I'm like, I'm not going up to Bobby and asking him off. So next day, Smoltzy tells him, so Bobby comes over to me. He's like, dude, why didn't you tell me? I already gave the lineup in, and he's like, I'll make you a deal. If you go to Bradenton in 2 days, because we need someone to go on a road trip, after your first at bat today, just start to roll your ankle when you run through the base. And I'll let you go play with them. So y'all know I like to swing a lot. So I swung at first pitch, grounded out, ran through first base, and I started, wiggling my ankle. Well, here comes Bobby waddling out, dip spit flying everywhere. But they had to remind me, you have to limp off the field. You can't go sprinting in. So the moment no one could see me, man, I went up the tunnel, put my golf clothes on. I was at Alworth in 15 minutes, and those guys were in the first fairway. I bombed my drive, man, right into them. We played 27 holes, had dinner, and about I think maybe a couple hours later, my wife, she's my fiance at the time, texted me and it said, Francoeur day-to-day with high ankle sprain. But when people ask me about Bobby Cox, I'm like, what other manager tells a 22-year-old to just bag a baseball game to go play golf with Tiger? It was awesome.
I'm a Kansas City native.
Yes.
I moved to Georgia 2 years ago. With that being said, if we jump on a plane right now, where are you taking me for barbecue in KC?
Ooh, that's a great question.
Gas station.
I tell you, a lot of people are going to want to go to Oklahoma Joe's in the gas station. That's it. But I'm a Gates guy, man. I like Gates. So wherever I don't have to see Taylor Swift. How's that? Yes, sir.
So you being a father, what's the best teachable moment you had with your 4 kids?
For kids?
You have 4 kids.
I do have 4 kids, yes. God, thanks for reminding me. You know what's funny is as we're doing this, you always think about it, and I think the best moment, and we can do as men, is be there for our kids. And I think what made me who I am, my mom and dad were there for me all the time. Now, I got whipped a lot. I got spanked. My dad was a disciplinarian, but I feel like this day and age with technology, all this stuff, I tell my kids, be intentional. There are days where I tell them, no screens, nothing. And to be passionate about something. My 9-year-old, people ask me all the time, does he play baseball? And I'm like, he hates baseball, which blew me away. But he loves lacrosse. So do we go out and throw the lacrosse ball every day? I know nothing about lacrosse. I mean, you talk about a lost sheep out there. But he loves it and he's passionate about it. So I think if there's one thing my dad taught me that I'm trying to talk to my kids is whatever your passion is, go after it, man. Don't let it stand in your way, and you got to work at it. Kids don't want to work today. You know, they want to get better, and I'm like, well, get better, go shoot a free throw. You know, you're not going to make free throws in a game if you don't do it in the thing. So, you know, I think that's one thing, right, that we talk about. If you have great fathers who are tough men, I think you'll raise tough kids. And we had Kirk Cousins in our podcast that we did, and I loved it because he was like, he has 2 boys, and he's like, the only thing I really, besides knowing Christ, want for my kids is to develop grit. He's like, I want my kids to have grit and resilience, and man, I don't think I could say much better than that. Yeah.
I think a lot of us of our age, we get to coach youth sports.
Oh, yeah.
It's a privilege and it's awesome. What's kind of one thing that one of your youth coaches kind of put on you that either changed the way you looked at sports or was meaningful to you, and what would you do if you kind of were on it?
Well, I think the number one thing I try to tell parents is when your kid's 10, he's not going pro tomorrow, so it's okay. But I have all the parents that ask me, like, so this podcast, Matt Ryan, I've got to know Matt over the years. He would not come on for like 8 months. And then his twin boys who were 5 played flag football, and like the second week he called me, he's like, I'm coming on. He was like, I got all sorts of stuff I want to say now about this. But the whole idea, right, like, I want my kids to play sports to learn work ethic, discipline, to be a great teammate, you know, because those are the guys and girls that are successful in life, whether they ever make it or not. And I always say, every parent that DMs me or all that crap, so I was like, well, my kid can do this. And I'm like, well, your kid's not Bryce Harper. You know, your kid's not Lamar Jackson, so relax. And I always say it like, if they get to that high school level and they really got talent, you'll know it's time to go all in. And they'll tell you, right? Like, that's why I said high school kids aren't going to, if they don't want to go do something, they're not going to do it. And so I always say, like, through 5th grade, development. Develop your kids, man. Work on skills, work on this, because they might not be the biggest, the fastest, this, but if they have good skills and they know how to play the game, when they do hit that growth spurt, they're going to be ahead of the game. So that's kind of, like I said, we had Tony Dungy on, man, and he was talking about all this stuff, and he's like, fundamentals, what's the first 3 letters in fundamentals? Fun. He's like, if you can't have fun doing what you're doing, and we all go back to when we played, right? When you had the most fun usually is when you were playing the best.
One thing I've struggled with as a man is like being that spiritual leader in your household, and sometimes it's inspiring to get better at it. I wonder, like, kind of what type of manage that, and that like thoughts on being that teacher or that spiritual leader, and how important that is to just, you know, you as a person, but also your family life as well.
Yeah, so I love that question because I'll be honest, probably for the first 6, 7 years of my marriage, my wife was way more spiritual than me. And I'll be honest with you, she probably still is, okay? But at the same time, like, I've become a spiritual household leader, and I think it's important for your kids to see that. It's important for your kids to see you pray. It's important for your kids to sit there and talk to them about stuff, talk to them about Christ. And that's why I kind of say, like, the whole thing of, like, you know, you hear people say, like, and that's where it's the old school way, right? Like with my dad sometimes, like, I still tell my dad, I'm like, why can't you not just tell me you love me, for God's sakes? It's not that hard. But he just doesn't have it in him. I mean, he honestly doesn't. Now, my dad would drive 20 hours tomorrow to do anything for me. So, like, I know it's there, but I think it's important for kids to see you vulnerable. I think it's important for kids to see you pray, the way you treat your wife, the way your kids treat your wife if you don't get on to them. Like, all that stuff, I think kids notice a lot sooner than you think. And I think we don't give kids enough credit for being smarter at a younger age, but I feel like the better job you can do with that. And I think, again, one of the things is I have a group of 5 guys that I'm in a small group with, man, and we stay on each other pretty hard. You know, we were talking during the podcast about when I travel, how hard it is from a sexual standpoint, being on the road, you know, at the hotel bars, this and that. And I said, you know, it's like anything. I have a couple accountability partners, and my whole small group, we have Find Our iPhone, so we know exactly where each other are at all times. And I'll be honest, at first I was kind of like, I don't know if I like this. But the more I thought about it, I'm like, this is perfect. I mean, these guys can call me out if I ever lie about something or I'm in a thing. So that's why I said, I think just being vulnerable, open up, and that's why I love being with a bunch of guys in a group. Yeah. Oh. Yeah, that's a great question. Actually, I'll still remember we were engaged in Chicago, and we walked through the hotel bar, and there were two players that my wife knew their wives, or my fiance at the time knew their wives, and they were in there with about 6 girls. And my wife looked in, and I just grabbed her, took her straight to the elevator, and she just cried the rest of the night. And because, and I remember telling her, like, I was, 22, 23 at the time, like, I'm committed to you. If I didn't want to do this, and I'll be honest, I tell a lot of young guys that come up in the game, like, don't get married and run beef on the road. That's what we call beef, if you're curious. That's the slang term. So you probably learned something from that. But in all seriousness, it was like, that was kind of the thing. Like, I told him, like, I don't agree with a lot of what you're doing, but just be single. Like, don't bring a family and your wife into it. A player, you hate seeing it, right? Because you see this stuff, and then you get to know them, and it's different. But I was telling on the podcast, like, my wife, whenever we went on a 7-day road trip, she would either come to the first part or the second part of the road trip. Like, we never spent more than 3-4 days apart, just even from a temptation standpoint of what that is. And I know a lot of guys struggle with that when you're traveling. I mean, it ain't easy, right? And so I think being able to have guardrails there with your wife and be open about it.
Yeah, I was gonna ask, like, I know you're saying it's pretty tough to share your faith with some of these guys you're with, but like, I don't know, do you have any practical advice for things that work? Like, obviously, there's no hiding what you're about, and all that. I don't know, any like practical advice or thoughts on sharing, even like a work setting or people that.
It's tough, and you always hear the hardest people to share your faith with are some of your best friends. And I've done that. There's probably 2 or 3 people I still kick myself, like, why am I not talking to them more? But with that being said, I think it's being vulnerable, and it's also pouring into them. Like I said, there was one guy actually I led to Christ, and for 2 years, literally 2 years, he was on the Royals in 11 and 12. We probably had a drink together almost every night at the hotel bar. And it took a year and a half before I could even bring Jesus up. Now, he knew that I was a Christian, but it just never came up. And then one night it finally came up. And that's why I said, like, even if you're just planting the seed for someone else to finish God's work in 5 years, and that's what I always say. You don't know who's going to lead them to Christ or what's going to happen or where their heart's going to go. But I think showing them grace, showing them how you live, showing them empathy, and I talk about leadership a lot. And especially in today's age, you heard me earlier, I talked about it, like we need more Christian men leadership than ever before. And I think that's having the values, having the integrity, stuff like that. And I think, again, it's a tough thing, but I think you got to be open to it. What's the worst they say? I don't want to talk about it. All right. Sorry. My favorite baseball stadium, Wrigley Field in the summer. It's awesome. Not the winter. Yeah, what do you got?
So your opening line to beginning to witness to people in a bar type setting, obviously that's going to be, variations of that, but generally, how do you open with witnessing about Jesus Christ in that kind of setting?
That is a great question. And honestly, most of the time, like a couple of these guys, you're just getting to know them. And honestly, when I can really dig in is when I finally start, hey, so tell me about your family background. Like, how'd you grow up? Did you grow up going to church? And I'll kind of get into that. And right away, I think if you ask that question, or at least for me when I was sitting there, you would either get them to open up a little bit about it, hey, my family, we grew up Catholic, or we grew up whatever, or they shut it down quick. And I'll be honest, when they shut it down quick, I backed off, man. And I just poured into them more. And then hoping, and honestly, I would just pray to God, open up another opportunity sometime. But I think you'd be shocked if you get talking to somebody and you kind of said, tell me about how you grew up. You know, did you grow up going to church? Man, 80% of the time, I would say more times than not, they went into that. And then you had an opportunity to share. And like I said, I think so many people, right? Like, especially I hear like, man, maybe I'll commit my life, but I don't want to give up the life I'm living. I don't want to get up what I'm doing. And that's where I laugh and sit there and say so much like, look, we're all sinners. We're going to mess up 1,000 more times before God comes to take us someday. So it's not about right or wrongs. To me, it's about the heart, right? It's about going to the altar, repenting, asking for forgiveness, and wanting God to better you. And I think if you go with that question, man, I'm telling you, I think more times than not, it opens up a can to talk to them. Yeah, I love that question because I talk about it a lot when I talk about leadership and talking about basically think before you talk a lot of the times. Because one of the biggest mistakes I almost made was when I got traded, I went to New York, we played 2 games, and then it was the worst thing possible. It was the All-Star break for 3 days, and we opened back up in Atlanta. So my first game back in Atlanta was as a Met. And I didn't like the way that the GM treated me. I didn't like the whole way it went down. Between us, he called me at 7:30 when he knew I was on the plane. Like, come on. You know, he's like, oh, I missed you. I'm sorry. I'm like, no, you're not. But I was so close to going off on the media about him, about the Braves, all this stuff. And my dad was kind of like, dude, you've got to be a leader above reproach. You got to let it go because you do not know what's going to come back someday. And I always say it, if I would have done that, no chance I ever come back and play for the Braves in 16. And no chance I announce for the Braves like I am now. And so that's a great question because I always say, like, sometimes, man, take the high road, shut your mouth, and move on because you don't know where it's going to take you.
Fellow Bostonian, I can understand your father.
Yeah.
But you've had to do a lot of starting over, a lot of faith and soul searching probably in your career. What has helped you either keep the faith or have patience that God will see you through, or it's just to have faith that things will work out?
That's a great question. Well, I told you this, like in 2007 when I started getting in the small group and having guys to come beside me during those times to lay hands on me and pray with me. And that I knew were praying just for me constantly. And then honestly, having faith in myself that it's like, I bet on myself every time. And it was confidence. And I knew I'd get kicked down and And like I said, I'm in El Paso, Texas, like what the hell's going on? But I kept knowing like, I belong there, man. I'm good enough to do this and I'm not going to give up. And that's why it's so funny because people ask me at the end of my career, how did you know? And I was like, God showed me the way. I was done. Like, and I was not mad about it. Like people, like they didn't have to drag my jersey off. It was it. And now that I look back and think about that last week for me in the big leagues with what happened in Miami and stuff, I'm like, how cool is it that God let me, that was my end of my story. And something I share with my kids all the time, like I played in the big leagues, but this team, this moment that we had, we'll always have together. And so, I think that's one thing a lot of people lack is the confidence just to go out there. Who cares? I try this, you talked about kids and a lesson behind with what to teach your kids. Who cares what other people think, man? Like, who truly cares? You come, like tonight, I'm going to come up here and speak, and there might be 5 people that think I suck. Oh, well. Like, you know what I'm saying? Like, I'm called to try to share and do these things, and if you're scared because, you know, you might get made fun of, you might, and today's society's even worse with our kids because of Snapchat and all that other crap. They're scared of getting made fun of and being on a video. I'm like, go out there, be yourself, and if someone doesn't like it, who cares? And that's all you can do, and that's why I talked about with sharing Christ like that. You share it. If someone don't want to hear it, oh well. But you know what? God knows what your heart is, and God knows what you're trying to do.